Right here with Tattoo University, and nothing weird going on, just sitting here with a plate of butter. That's a perfectly normal thing to do. Today I'm going to talk about the correct depth for your needles. This always throws everybody off, and a lot of beginning artists have problems with this. This is something that takes a little bit of practice to get. And I feel like there's a lot of bad information out there on this subject. So I'm going to show you guys how I make sure I get the correct needle depth when I'm tattooing. I'm going to explain to you guys why you need to adjust your machines and how you tattoo with the different needle groups that you use. You need to adjust to make sure you're at the correct depth. Because with a bigger needle group, you might not be going deep enough. And with a smaller needle group, you might be going too deep because it's easier to do that with that grouping. We're also going to talk about self-tattooing, which there's a lot of controversy around this. And I think it is a good way for beginning artists to learn how to tattoo. And self-tattooing will actually help you learn the correct needle depth and the feel of that. You will actually feel when you are at the correct depth. Now, before we get started, I want to let people know I'm not encouraging them to just get a tattoo machine and start tattooing on themselves. I had to learn how to tattoo before I could get into a shop. In this area, in order to work at a shop, you had to know how to tattoo. So I practiced a lot on myself because I didn't want to mess somebody else up. I was okay, I was willing to have something mess up on myself. I could deal with that because that was part of the learning process, and I was willing to do that. I was not willing to mess somebody else up or hurt somebody else. So I did it on myself first, so I knew that the process would go okay, it was correct, and it would heal good before I even tried tattooing on anybody else. I had already earned an art degree before I started tattooing. I had no idea that I was going to tattoo. It was circumstance that just got me into tattooing, and I actually started tattooing because there wasn't a lot of good tattooers in the area, and I loved tattoos. Me and my wife wanted tattoos, and we just got tired of paying for really bad tattoos, and we wanted some nice tattoos. So when my wife told me she wanted another tattoo, and we just had a bad experience getting tattooed, I didn't want to spend the money to pay somebody to give her a bad tattoo. So I told her instead, why don't we spend the money and get the tattoo equipment, and I'll learn how to tattoo you. And since the rest has been history since there. It's all kind of a coincidence. It just kind of snowballed and things just started happening. And I never planned on being a tattoo artist or doing YouTube videos for tattoos, but the need was there and people wanted to watch these videos. I just started off answering people's questions, and then people asked more questions. Next thing you know, we just tattoo universities around, and everybody's jumped on board with that, and it's helped a lot of people out. So because it is helping people, I've continued to do it, and it's growing. But the way I got started was my wife bought me a tattoo kit, and I had to go from there and learn everything from there, and it just kept growing and growing. But before my very first tattoo that I did on myself, I knew how to, I already had a art background. I've already done a lot of artwork, went to school to learn how to do artwork, so I didn't just get a machine and start drilling on myself. I learned a lot of things, and I read a lot of books and went through the process. I did it the best way I could, and I did it in a way where I could really maximize the learning potential from it. I didn't just go to town on my leg. I started with very small tattoos, and I started with my line work, and then I moved on. The problem I'm seeing when I talk to a lot of you guys is that you don't focus on one area. you focus on everything. You're all over the place, and you try to do a tattoo, and your very first tattoo, you're trying to do line work, color blending, and shading all at the same time, but you still don't have line work or shading down or color packing down, but you try to do all of that in one tattoo, and you've kind of wasted that area, wasted that precious skin that you have, where you could have learned a lot more. You could have picked a small area, worked on your line work, worked on your line work in another area, just kept until your line work was dialed in and your machines were dialed in. People don't understand the correlation between the machines and the line work. So you have to dial in your machines too and make sure your machines are working correctly. So you have to perfect your technique, and you have to tune your machines. Those go hand in hand. So you don't move on until that is done, and you keep dialing in. Tattooing is simple, it's easy. Everything you do is real little things, but there's a lot of these little things that you have to learn. So you have to pick one thing up and learn it, and then pick another thing up and learn it, and until it becomes a habit. All these little things just become habits, because it's not rocket science where you have to know geometry and all this other stuff, but you have to know all the little tweaks and all the little adjustments and how to set up, all the things not to do, all the things that will, you have to learn all the little problem solving techniques. Every tattoo is different, every person is different. You have to adjust. And I want you guys to know that this channel, we're not trying to replace a mentor. We're not trying to replace the apprenticeship. We're just trying to give you enough information so that when you do those things, you can fall back on the information you have and tell whether or not your mentor is good and teaching you information and a good tattoo artist, or if they're just trying to rip you off. Or if you're in a situation like I was, where in order to get into a tattoo shop, you needed to know certain things and know how to tattoo, we want to give you that information so that you can get into a tattoo shop. This isn't for the people who want to tattoo in their kitchen and do things the wrong way. This is information so you guys can tattoo the right way, and you can better yourselves as tattoo artists, get into better situations, and get into those shops and start tattooing. Use this information to accomplish that, to get into a shop. If you don't have any shops around you, or you might live in a place where it's illegal to tattoo, learn how to tattoo, and then get in your own shop, get in your own little studio. Right now, there are no secrets in the tattoo industry. It's not like it used to be where nobody talked to each other. Now there's books on tattooing, everybody's talking about tattooing, everybody's going to tattoo expos. The information is out there. The only secrets are going to be trade secrets, or maybe certain ingredients that people are using, but the rest of the information is out there and you can find it. I learned how to tattoo with information on the internet and information in books, and then I took that information and I improved upon it by testing out other things and doing more research and testing out theories that other people have not tested before. And I've tried new things. That's how I've come up with new ways of doing things. And you guys might have to do the same thing. I'm not encouraging you guys to go lone wolf in your basement and just tattoo the hell out of everybody. So I'm not encouraging you guys to be the lone wolf and to be by yourselves and just hold up in your basement tattooing people. I'm encouraging you guys to get out there, to use social media, to get into the shops, to do things correctly, and to communicate with other tattoo artists. And in this way we can all help each other out, and we can all improve our tattooing techniques. And when one of us comes up with a new idea that's better for everybody, we can share it and get it out there. We're kind of stuck tattooing the old way. We're still using green soap, some of us, we're still selling some of these products that were considered good 20, 30 years ago, but maybe we need to start changing it up because there's better products out there now. Those are outdated things. Some of the books we have and information we have is outdated information. So we need to start updating our tattooing knowledge and improving upon it and improving our equipment and improving how we tattoo. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you guys that this isn't a finished tattoo. I started it, and then my ass started to hurt and my legs started to hurt. I'm starting to feel like an old man sometimes, so and I realized from where it is at, it is a difficult tattoo to do. So I realized that, and I'm going to show you some of the techniques, but really I'm just going to find somebody to finish up that tattoo for me. Because it's going to be a lot easier on them and they'll be able to do a better job on it. But I was able to show you guys a couple of techniques and show you how you can figure out the correct tattoo needle depth. And there's a lot of good information here, so enjoy the video. I want you guys to follow me on Instagram at nickdurant_tattoos. I'm not really a social media person, which might seem odd because I have a YouTube channel, but I worked on my YouTube not realizing that I needed to work on my Instagram page also and some of these other pages, and then people started making comments, oh, the Instagram page isn't that great, so he's not that great, or he can't do artwork. So I have been spending a lot of time on Instagram, and if you guys want to support me, you can go to Go Tattoo You also on Instagram, which I want to be a community page. I want to post artwork that you guys have done. If you have watched the channel and your tattooing has improved because of the channel, I want you to send me messages, send me your artwork on that page, and then I'm going to post them to let people know that this is working and that the channel is working and it's helping a lot of people out. And then you can check out my personal page, nickdurant_tattoos, and you can see all my animals and some of my artwork, and I will be posting more tattoos as I update that page. Learned how to tattoo, and then since I started this channel, I've had to learn how to do social media too, so I'm still kind of catching up in a lot of these areas. What is the correct needle depth? And how do you set the correct needle depth? I'm letting you know there's a lot of bad information about this out there, and I'll cover this more. This is why I'm showing you the videos, so that you guys can understand and show you on film how to do this correctly. People out there are saying, oh, you need 1 millimeter for this and 2 millimeter for that and 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, whatever. Like, forget about that. Do not think about that when it comes to needle depth. There's another way. I'll show you how to get the correct needle depth. When I set up my tattoo machine, I always set it up the same way. When I set up my needle in my machine, I always connect it, set everything up, and then I set the length of my tube so that the needle of a liner or round shader barely sticks out of the tip. I do this every time, and every time I don't have to think about where my needle is or my needle depth. Here the needle is all the way in. I loosen this up, I loosen up my vise, and I pull the tube back just so a little bit of the needle is sticking out of the end, past the end of the tube, so that if I put this needle on my skin, the needle would be touching my skin, not the end of the tube. Just the tip of the needle would rest on my skin. It's poking just a little bit out of the end of this diamond tip. And I set this machine up this way every single time. All of my machines, I set them up this way. Now, before I bag my machine, I want to make sure that it's running correctly. So then I listen to the machine and turn up the machine until I hear it kick on. Alright, so 5.3, I'm just going to turn it up another 0.5. Let's just go to, let's go to 6. And I can hear the machines running correctly at 6 volts. It's not sputtering. I'm not cranking it up anymore. I just put it to where it works. Just enough voltage so that it's working and it's running smoothly. And if I put my finger right here under the armature bar nipple, my needle will still come out of the end of the tip. That is all I do when I'm setting up my machine. Because I do it the same way every time I set up. Every time I set up, everything is done. So I don't even have to think about it. That's just how I do it. And now I bag my machine because it's hard to mess with this thing when it's in the bag. But if I tune it and then bag it, it's already tuned and ready to go. So now my machine is bagged and it's set up. Anything I'm not using is off of my tattoo station, so I don't contaminate anything. Alright, everything's bagged, out of the way. This is a product I want you guys to check out. Antiseptic, antimicrobial skin cleanser. And just think about this when it comes to taking care of the area before you tattoo it. If you shave the area and then have someone wash the area with this, it's a lot better than just using alcohol on the area. The alcohol might kill things, but it stays there. It's still dirty. It's not washed. Sometimes cleaning the area with soap, especially a soap that's made for that, is a better option. And if you read this, it says this prevents skin infections. You can even use this product for aftercare because it's good for cuts, and it says right here has antiseptic activities and a persistent, which means it continues, it keeps going, antimicrobial effect. If you haven't heard of this yet, check it out. And this is the same thing. This is just what a hospital will give you before you go into surgery. And this is the over-the-counter stuff. And this will tell you right here that it's for a skinned wound and general skin cleanser. So it's good stuff, especially when you're trying to prevent infections. So again, we're trying to come up with better ways of tattooing. So now I'm going to show you how I make some of my color choices. Okay, so this probably looks familiar to some of you. It was done in another video. And there was a lot of controversy over this one because people said that I was doing it the wrong way because they didn't quite understand why I did the video. Someone had sent me a picture of a tattoo that wasn't completely finished, and the outline was really weak. So I was trying to show them, because I outlined this first and it had a really weak outline, and then I went back in and made the lines bolder to show that if you have a tattoo with a weak outline and you're learning how to tattoo, or if someone's tattooed this on you, you can go back and get it fixed. You can improve your original tattoos as long as the design is good and you don't screw up too much. You can fix the tattoos as you're learning. And if you're learning to tattoo, there might be a chance that you are tattooing on yourself. I feel like self-tattooing is a good thing. It's very controversial, people always say you need to get a buddy and tattoo on your buddy. But I feel like if you want to get into tattooing, you need to kind of pay the price to get in. You need to put in your dues. You need to spend the time learning. And if you're not willing to do it on yourself, then you shouldn't be able to do it on somebody else. And I am self-taught. I had to learn how to tattoo before I could ever work in a shop. I had to show them I could tattoo at the shop before they let me work there. So I've tattooed myself a lot. And there's a way to do it to maximize what you can learn from your tattoos. This is a hand-poked tattoo. This was my first hand-poked tattoo. And I didn't even know if it was going to stay or not because it wasn't painful at all. I just thought it was going to fade out. But it stuck really good. And I learned how to hand poke by doing this. And this tattoo was when I got into learning how to do shading. And I was practicing my shading. And before I did all that, on my other leg, wherever I could tattoo myself, I've been tattooed by myself because I've done that. I've done it for the practice so I could try out different techniques. Some places are easier than others, so you don't want to pick really weird places to tattoo yourself. You kind of want to stick to your thighs. And this was kind of difficult. You can get good tattoos that you do yourself, but it's a little harder to stretch. It is painful on yourself, so you might not dig in as much as you need to. But these are all tattoos I've done, and they're just fine. I'm proud of every single one of them. If you're learning about tattooing and the depth of your needle, and you want to see if your machines are set up correctly, a good way to do that is to tattoo yourself. Because you can watch this tattoo heal. The practice skins don't heal, the pig skins don't heal, none of that heals. And on your buddy, you might tattoo him and never see him again. You can't watch that tattoo the full time it's healing. And if you tattoo yourself, you feel the tattoo. You feel if it's too painful. You feel if it's not painful enough. You get more of a sense of how to tattoo correctly if you are doing it on yourself. The incorrect way to start tattooing yourself is just to do a full sleeve right off the bat and just sleeve your leg up before you know how to tattoo. You want to focus on certain areas first. First, do your line work and just keep doing line work until you get good at it. Try some script. Do lots and lots of line work. Everything you should do is line work. Don't try to fill anything in yet. Don't try to do shading yet. until your line work is immaculate, until your line work is perfect. Just keep doing line work tattoos. And once your line work comes in, then start focusing on color packing. Because shading has a little more difficulty level to it. Shading is a little more difficult. So color packing is a little easier. Move from line work to color packing, then to shading, and then put everything together. So do smaller tattoos and just keep building up. Keep doing the smaller tattoos till you do make a sleeve, but they're all smaller tattoos that you've worked on and you've focused on different techniques. And every time you do a different tattoo, try a different technique. Once you get your line works down, do hand poking. Once your hand poking's down, focus on shading. Use yourself to improve and to focus on your skills and to do different things. If you tattoo yourself and it's bad, you're not going to show anybody. If you tattoo somebody else and it's bad, they are going to show everybody. You can always work on your tattoos as you get better. If you tattoo somebody and they go away, you'll never see that person again. You'll never be able to complete that tattoo. Don't dismiss self-tattooing. It can be beneficial to your learning process. Do it correctly. Do it in easier spots. Sometimes, like this thing right here, it didn't hurt to do the tattoo, but my hip hurt for like a week. The position I had to be to tattoo it. This was hard to tattoo myself. I had to get someone to help me tattoo to stretch it out. And I tattooed all of this myself, but I had to tape my arm up and stretch my arm. So you have to have the proper stretch and you have to pick areas where you can use both your hands to tattoo so you can stretch properly, or you're going to have to get someone to help you out and stretch for you. That's the drawback. So pick the right areas to tattoo yourself in and practice. And this is difficult. This was a more difficult tattoo because I'm looking at it upside down. Now that should not matter. You should be able to draw things upside down. You're just drawing shapes and highlights and things like that. But the difficulty level is higher here because it's hard for me to see it. Like what I see here is different from what you guys see. My perception is different. I'm way up here, my head's way up here, and I'm looking down on this. So looking straight on, I get a different viewpoint. I see things differently. So now if I look at it differently, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that while I was tattooing at first. But now I see it. So do it somewhere where you have clear vision, you can stretch properly, you can use both hands. And do little things, focus on line work first, then move to color packing, then move to shading, then move to color blending, and then move to hand poking, then just do whatever you can. Do it small enough so you can do it all in one area and get all of those techniques down, and then you can go practice on other people. Let's see if I can check this out. See how much my needle is hanging out there? You can see this is a fleshier part of my leg, and it is going just fine. See this part right here where my bone is at? See how it's bleeding a little bit? A little bit of blood is okay, but why is it bleeding there and not over here? It's because there's a bone underneath there. The skin from there to there is different. So if I just tattoo this the same everywhere, and every time I tattoo, I just assume that everything is the same, and that every time I tattoo, I'm going to put 2 millimeters out or a millimeter out and just tattoo the same way all the time. In one tattoo, you will get half of a jacked up tattoo depending on where you are tattooing. You need to look at the tattoo. You need to see what you're doing. Is the line work nice and bright? I did the line, wipe it off, it's still solid. It's nice and dark. So if it was too light, I might not be going deep enough. If it's bleeding, I might need to back off a little bit. This bone right here, this is a perfect example. I have these skinny legs and a bone, you can see it, it goes right up here. And if you tattoo on yourself and you tattoo right on that bone, you're going to find that it feels really awesome compared to tattooing in a fleshy area where it's okay. It's a little more painful right on top of the bone, and you don't go as deep because you will bleed more. And how do you know that? You know that by looking at the tattoo while you are tattooing. That is how you know the correct depth of your tattoo machine. You just give your machine enough voltage to do the job, and then you look at it and you adjust while you tattoo. Is it bleeding too much? Maybe I'm going too deep. Is it painful? Is it more painful? How do you know if it's painful? If you're tattooing somebody else, well, either they tell you, but if you're doing it on yourself, you're going to feel that it is more painful. You're going to hit that bone and you're immediately going to back out with your hand because that does not feel good. That is painful. You should feel a little bit of pain. So there's a balance there. Not enough pain, you're not going too deep. Not too little pain, you're not going deep enough. And if you're tattooing on yourself, you'll start to feel where that spot is at. And you'll start to get the hang of it. And you'll start to stay in that zone when you're tattooing. And also, when you tattoo, your needle starts to go into the skin and you start to feel a little pushback. That is when you know you'll start feeling that. Not on fake skins, but on real skins, you'll start feeling that pushback and you'll know that you're in the correct spot. So you do it by feel. After you've tattooed enough, you start to know this feels right or this doesn't feel right. I want to go into more detail about what I just explained. How you feel when you're at the correct depth while you're tattooing. Here is a 9 round shader. And if you look at the shape of this, it is a bunch of needles that are acting like one needle. There's not a lot of surface area to this. In comparison, here is a 13 mag. Look at the difference in the surface area of these two. This is very small. The 9 round is very small. The 13 mag is bigger. Let's make this even more interesting. Here is a 5-round liner. Now you might be questioning why I'm showing you these with a stick of butter. I'm going to show you why. I'm going to explain something here. 5-round liner into this butter. There's not a lot of pushback on it. I don't feel a lot of upward force because the needle is really small and it just goes into the butter. It's like that saying, a hot knife through butter, which means it would go through it very quickly and very easily. So because there's not a lot of surface area with a 5-round liner, it will go into the butter very easily without a lot of pushback. And as you move up in needles, as you add more needles to your grouping, it gets harder and harder to push that needle into the butter. And once you get into a very big mag grouping here, it takes a lot. 5-round, you don't feel it push back very much. Just putting these in until I feel them stick. So on the 5-round liner, you're just pushing 5 little tiny needles into the skin. 9-round shader, you're pushing 9 little needles into the skin, but the needles are looser and they take up more area. And then on your 13 mag, you have all these needles. You have 13 needles. So you have more needles and they're spread out more. And it takes more for those to go in. You need the correct amount of force when you are setting up your machine for these needles. When you're tattooing, you never want to push hard on your tattoo machine. You never want to just push down on that tattoo machine. With a tattoo machine, you want to let the machine do the work. And you want to just put enough downward force until you feel it pushing back. You never want to push into somebody's skin with that machine. You never want to grind it into somebody. You want to let the machine do its job, but you just want to give it just enough force till you feel it kicking back, till you feel there's a little substance there. And that's when you'll see your line work starting to get nice and dark. If you push hard, you're just going to go too deep. But if you just push until you feel it push back a little bit, you'll be in the correct spot. Now, with the smaller needle group, you're not going to feel it as much. It's a little more tricky. So you really have to be careful with your needle and watching your tattoo with the smaller group, because you're not going to feel it as much. But once you get into these larger needle groups, you are going to feel it a lot more, especially the 7s. I mean, usually 5s and 3s, you don't feel it as much. But as soon as you get into the 7s and higher, you'll feel that pushback a little bit. But using the smaller needle groups, because they go in so easily, you don't feel it as much. But as soon as you get into the 7s or higher, even 9s, you really kind of feel it pushing back. You really feel it on your finger and kind of on your hand right in this area. You can kind of feel it pushing back. You're not pushing down with a lot of force. You're just giving enough force until you feel it push back a little bit. You're just going to go in and you start right about there. You start feeling this pushback. You start feeling it. You feel it on your fingers. You feel it in your thumb. If you're just going into the skin, you don't feel it. right when you enter the skin, but as soon as you go into the skin and you push just a little bit, all of a sudden you feel this pushback, a little bit of a pushback. Nothing, you're in here, nothing, you're doing whatever. Here's the skin, you're not feeling it, you're not at the right depth. The client's not feeling it because you're really not doing anything. It looks like you're in the skin, but you're not at the right depth. You're really surfacey with this. And as soon as you push down just a little bit, you feel that pushback. And you know you're in the right spot. But if you crank your machine way up and you just push down and go, you're just going to tear somebody up. This is where a lot of tattoo artists mess up in this area, because they ignore the warning signs and they just crank their tattoo machine up and just dig into people, they feel like they need to slam that tattoo into somebody, when that is not the correct way to tattoo. You want to tattoo somebody, but you want to sneak the ink in. You want to be a tattoo ninja. Sneak it under the skin so the skin doesn't even know that your needle has been in there. But if you crank your voltage way up and you just slam it in there, you're going to kill that area and that tattoo will fall out. The other side to this is sometimes it is easier to tattoo with these 7 mags and these smaller needles because they go in easier. And it's a little harder to tattoo with your bigger needle groups because you're not getting to the correct depth because it's pushing back. So when you are getting to the correct depth with the smaller needles, very easily, if you try to put the 13 mag with the same settings, it's not going to go the same depth. There's more needles, so it's going to push back more. So you need to adjust your tattoo machine so that'll give it a little more push. That's why, for you newer artists, if you stick to the smaller needle groups, you'll be okay because it's easier to tattoo with these. And this is why for a newer artist, I would say stick to your 7s. Your 7s up to your 13s. Because those are pretty easy to use. Once you go the opposite direction, once you go really small or really big, your machine has to be set up correctly. You have to have a little more skill to tattoo that way. You have to know what you're doing once you go to the opposite ends. Once you either go really small or really big, your machine, your setup, how you tattoo, it's a little different. And you have to adjust for those. If you stick with your 7s and your 5s and your 9s, everything in the middle, when you first start tattooing, you'll be better off. Just because it's easier to get that ink in there. And then as you learn, you progress, you can move to your bigger needles and maybe do some fancy stuff with your little tiny needles. With a coil machine, you can do 2 things. My needle's hanging out, so I can just adjust my finger on my depth, how far in I push or how far up I am. Or to make it hit harder, you can turn up the voltage a little bit. But I like to just keep the voltage at just enough to keep the machine running properly. I don't go higher than that. I use just enough voltage so that it's not turning the skin into hamburger meat. It's just going deep enough. And then I can use my finger and my depth if I need to go out a little bit or if I feel like I need to go in a little bit more. So instead of adjusting my voltage every time I go back and forth across my leg, I just don't go as deep over here. Instead of adjusting the voltage, I just adjust the depth with my finger and where I'm holding the machine. A little bit of blood is normal. A lot of blood is not okay. Continuous bleeding. See how I just stopped the bleeding by patting it like that? And it stopped bleeding. But if it's pouring out, if it's dripping down the skin, you might be doing something wrong. Your machine is either running too fast and chewing up the area, or you are going too deep. Now another thing to remember here is right in front here, my skin is really tight. In the back, it's kind of jiggly and loose, but in the front, it's tight. So if I really stretch the hell out of this, it might actually cut the skin while I'm tattooing. You want to leave it tight, but in areas like this, there's less stretching involved. It's kind of a natural stretch. The skin is stretched already. We're going to stretch a little bit, but you don't have to overkill it because you already got this stretch and it's already above that bone right there. Kind of using like a fake light source from up here. So to give it depth, I'm shading anything that's going underneath the top areas. So it'll give it a little more depth, make it look a little more realistic. You know, before this is just a line tattoo, so there's not a lot of depth to it. What I'm going to do now is use some color and add some depth to this. This is from a story where the frog and the scorpion try to cross the river, and the scorpion stings the frog and they both die. And the frog asked him, "Why did you sting me?" And he said, "It's my nature." So what I'm doing now is coloring the scorpion blue so that it's a scorpion, but it also reflects the story of the scorpion and how he drowned in the river, which is water and usually blue. As you're tattooing, your tip's going to get a little gunky and a little dry after a while, so make sure that you dip in your water every once in a while just to kind of clean that up and keep your ink flowing nice. And you can always, if you have a problem with your ink dripping out of the end, this is another question I get asked, just dab that little bit of excess ink off of your rag while you're tattooing, or switch out your ink so you have a thicker ink, or switch out your tip so it doesn't run out. You know, if you're tattooing along and all of a sudden you kind of lose your mojo, like the ink just isn't going in, but it was a minute ago, dip in your water, get that ink and that tip to loosen up a little bit. When you're doing color, the color should just go in. And it should be nice and solid if you're packing color. And it shouldn't be a difficult task. But sometimes you'll find that the color really isn't like going in solid like you want it to. So you need to figure out what's going on. One of the tricks you can do is loosen up your vise. Maybe you have too much hang. So you move your tube, you move your So one of the tricks is to move your tube and your hang, adjust that. Maybe you have too much of the needle hanging out, maybe you don't have enough. So if you run into problems, adjust it and then try it out again and see where you're at. If the color goes in solid, you're fine. But if you're still having problems, maybe your ink is now too goopy, dip it in the water, try it again. If that's still not working, maybe your machine is starting to overheat if you don't have a good machine, and you need to turn the voltage up a little bit. Everybody starts to think once your machine stops working halfway during the tattoo that it's your capacitor. But a lot of times it's you're using a cheap machine and it's just overheating because it's stressed out and you're using way too much voltage, and that causes the machine not to work as good, and you have to turn up the voltage to make it work, which just causes it to overheat even more. It's a vicious cycle. So don't always blame it on your capacitor. You can run a tattoo machine without a capacitor on it. The capacitor just helps it run a little bit better. But everybody likes to blame the capacitor when the machine stops working. But usually it's because the machine isn't tuned correctly and it's overheating. If you're having problems with the ink going into the skin, adjust your tip. Try dipping in water. If it's still not working, try this. Dip your tip into ink, and then it'll be a little drippy on the end. Just put a little blob of ink on the skin. Just let it blob up like a little puddle. So let the ink puddle up on the skin, and then see if you can tattoo it. Use this little puddle of ink to tattoo the area. If the ink goes in really well this way, you know that you have enough force with your needles, but you're just having a flow problem with the ink. And if that's the case, you just need to figure out how to make that ink and your needle work together. If you're still not packing ink this way, then maybe you don't have enough force from your machine to pack the ink, or maybe your depth isn't deep enough. Maybe you don't have the right depth at that point, and then you need to turn up your voltage a little bit, or it is kind of hard to see where you're tattooing when you put the puddle of ink on there. So do it in a spot maybe where you're doing some little dots or something like that, somewhere where it's not as important, and just see if it's working. And if it works, that means you have enough force for your needles to put the ink in where it needs to go, but then you just have a problem with the ink flow being correct. Some of the important things to look out for, especially if you are new to tattooing. The skin should always look like skin. You want the skin to heal up over the pigment, which will leave you a nice, shiny, bright tattoo. If you scab the area, that skin is dead, it will fall out. and your pigment falls out, we like to blame the client's aftercare, but really, unless it gets infected, the tattoo should look good, and if it looks bad, it's because of the artist. If the color is nice and bright, if your darks are nice and really dark, you have the ink where it needs to be, and it's not looking fuzzy, you have a crisp image. You are going the right depth. If this heals up and falls out, and you have this ghost image here, you are not going deep enough. If it gets fuzzy and blurry, you are going too deep. You need to read the tattoo. I'm going to start saying that a lot. Read the tattoo. To know the correct depth, don't worry about 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, whatever. Worry about how the tattoo looks and how the tattoo heals. Do some tattoos on yourself. Once they've healed, see what they look like. See what they look like through the healing process. I worked on this tattoo 3 times. I might even go into it a 4th time, give it a background next time. It's all part of the learning process. I'm using these tattoos to learn and to test things out. I'm not looking at this like, oh, this is a complete tattoo yet. All I wanted to do was test the machines out, test my depth, make sure it's correct. Once I know that's correct, I do it again. If it works again, I'm good. And I keep doing that until I don't even have to worry about it anymore. The tattoos just come out and they look good. Because I've practiced and practiced and practiced enough and tested out. If you don't have someone sitting there telling you how it should look, then you have to figure it out on your own. I had to figure everything out on my own. There's a lot of missing information. So I'm putting this information out there so that the next person doesn't have to look for it like I did, or they don't have to stumble along until they find it, or they don't have to jack themselves up until they figure out. I scarred myself a lot before I finally figured out how to adjust my depth and adjust my machines so that the tattoo is correct. If I run my hand over this tattoo, I wish you guys could all reach out and touch my leg. It would be really creepy, but I wish you could do it. This just feels like my leg. It's not raised. It's not chewed up. I don't feel any different. If I run my hand over here, it feels the same as if I run my hand right here. You should be able to run your hand over a fresh tattoo and it should feel like the skin. It should feel like everything around it. If it is raised at all, you are doing too much damage. This should heal like a sunburn would heal. There should be just a little flaky skin that comes off of this tattoo as it's healing. If it scars up, you went too deep or you're going too fast and you're messing up. A fresh tattoo, if you run your hand over it, it should feel like the skin around it. You see how there's no redness here? It's a little bit right here. Like I said, this skin right here is not as thick as this skin over here. And there's bone and stuff underneath it. So I'm getting a little redness right here. And the rest of the tattoo, you don't see any redness at all. Except for right there, you really have to use the tips of the needle, and you can't go deep at all because just using the tips is enough to irritate this area right here. And I know that by reading the tattoo. Let's go in close here. Look at this. If I'm looking at this, no redness. Come over here. It's a little red. It's different. I'm looking at it. You need to be looking at your tattoos while you are doing them.